a National Day of Prayer from coast to coast.
I pray daily. I pray for guidance and wisdom and strength.
As a Christian Science practitioner, I'm one who has devoted
people
my life to
from many
helping others
different
through
faiths
prayer. It's a
all over
public
the
prayer
world
position.
believe
It is
that
something
prayer
that I do
works.
for the public. So an individual would call me up and ask for prayer.
Over the years, there have been many tests by scientists of the power of prayer. A famous study got two large groups of heart patients and had people of Christian, Muslim and Hindu faiths pray for just one half of the patients. The results were that prayer made no difference to the long-term health of the patients that were prayed for compared to the ones that were not. Prayer does nothing when tested, and the results are exactly what you would expect from random chance. In a couple or so cases that disagreed with these findings, it was later shown that their experiment was flawed and in some cases fraudulent. Some doctors think self-prayer may help in stress reduction that might lead to better blood pressure or recuperative abilities, but these exact same effects could be equally brought about by yoga or some well-wishing from a famous celebrity.
There was a time her parents spent their nights crying in the hospital, praying for their daughter to make it. But tears of a different sort a week ago when their now recovering 16-year-old had her wildest dream come true. Hannah Montana. How big of a Miley Cyrus fan? Huge.
If we claim gods cannot be rolled out on our whims, why is it that so many evangelists in churches and on television across the world churn out miracles and healing on demand, week in, week out, without fail? Why would gods show up and prove their existence every week for the Benny Hinn show, yet remain completely silent in any scientific study, even when the scientists, hospitals and patients have been devoutly religious? Also, why has prayer never healed an amputee victim? Why would gods answer a rapper's prayer to win a Grammy, but ignore the prayers of a child being raped by a paedophile?
Has concluded that priests and nuns terrorised thousands of boys and girls for decades. In a highly damning report, government inspectors are accused of failing to stop chronic beatings, rapes and humiliation.
And despite the fact that by now literally billions of people of all faiths have prayed for world peace or an end to starvation, we see no effect whatsoever.
Who really started it?
In the Horn of Africa, a deadly cocktail of successive droughts, armed conflicts and rising food prices has put the most vulnerable at risk. The UN estimates that more than 14 million people are in need of help.
Is it because the prayers asked were too big, too small, or that gods comfort us but do not act directly in the world to allow us free will? Or are these all a very human way of denying the fact that we are being delusional and prayer does not work? So if the scientific evidence cannot support prayer, what about the testimony of believers?
Dr. Cox is an elder of this church with a medical degree. Do you believe that Jesus Christ can heal this baby boy? Yes. Amen. That's the confession of the church. So we're going to pray. Just pray with me, church. You can lift up prayers out loud.
The anecdotal evidence for prayer is overwhelming. Everyone knows someone who claims their gods answered their prayers or healed them. But human beings are too easily influenced by psychological or dishonest motivations, and there are many drugs and mental illnesses that cause all the exact same effects experienced in supernatural encounters.
Doctors use three main categories to describe the symptoms of schizophrenia. Positive symptoms include hallucinations, such as hearing imaginary voices or seeing people who aren't there.
And if we believe anecdotes as proof without a need for evidence, that opens the door for literally any claim to be equally acceptable.
he said the sergeant shapeshifted in front of him, turned into a reptile.
It was one of the most talked about stories in Cleveland history.
6 years ago, a doctor claimed Elvis Presley was still alive and that he was treating him.
Well, let me tell you that I had this experience a while ago, back in the mid-'80s, where it appeared to be a close encounter of the third kind.
You saw aliens then?
Well, yeah.
Like, what wakes you up? Freddy usually taps on the window, that just a little light little tap. Nobody else can hear it. To me, it's really loud.
These verses tell us that apparently the unicorn is something similar to an animal you would plow with.
I do believe in fairies.
In 2001, an inmate in Washington state sued the prison for his religious rights to worship Thor, god of thunder, and won. In the case of healing prayers, let's say there's a terminal disease that has a known survival rate of 1 in 1,000. At the end, 1 person is alive and 999 are dead. Most of them prayed for God to save them. Now the person who survives says prayer cured them, but it only appears that way because the other 999 whose prayers did not work are not around to tell us that it failed. Now let's imagine instead that he died, and now a different person survives. Of course, they too will now say it was prayer that saved me. So, regardless of who survives, we usually end up with someone claiming their gods saved them, when in fact they're just a predicted statistic by the survival rate. And since most people confronted by death will consider prayer as a nothing-to-lose option, regardless of who survives, it will always appear that gods are reaching down and rescuing them, when in fact it's just random chance. In a population of 7 billion people, math not only predicts extraordinary things can happen, it absolutely guarantees they will, every minute of every single day, and we don't need to invent supernatural explanations to explain them. It's just the laws of probability. Isn't it also slightly ungrateful in the case of patients that they ignore the fact that their surgeon did 3 years at college, 4 years at med school, 5 years as a resident doctor, and they stayed in a multi-million-dollar hospital with qualified nurses and all the technological marvels of a modern medical facility? If you believe prayer is really what cures you, surely going to the hospital next time you're sick is unnecessary.
So the whole school prayed for her. She prayed over the cousins, the other cousins. They went back.
They were wheeling the daughter to the morgue.
Yeah, they were getting ready. Well, they were going to do the surgery to take her organs to donate it, right? And so they were getting ready to prep her for the surgery. And she was deader than dead. Deader than dead.
And she's alive?
She's alive. She's in the hospital, but she's alive.
But she's alive?
Cancel the funeral? Had to cancel all the funeral services.
They had to cancel the funeral services! Oh my God! We are in America and the dead are being raised!
So, having looked at prayer, we are left with 3 possible conclusions. Either prayer can never be tested,
We don't really care if it's validated or not.
or that witness testimony proves prayer is real, along with imaginary friends, fairies, and Elvis living in Cleveland. Or that prayer is a superstition that has been disproved by modern science. What need then does prayer serve? Perhaps it's a way of feeling we have control over uncontrollable events in our lives. Or a cynic could argue that offering to pray for someone is our way of removing guilt that we have in fact done nothing to help someone. In part 3, we will discover another way humans have tried to communicate with a higher power. So if not gods, is anybody out there?